Joining me today in the Capital TV show, Professor Brenda Shaffer. She is specialized in international energy in Azerbaijan and the Middle East. Professor, you are most welcome.
Thank you. Good evening.
Let me start talking about the Mercer Street, the attack on the tanker Mercer Street. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense said that it started the drone from Yemen. The drone was produced in Iran. Do you think that the Biden administration is doing the right thing to stop these attacks?
Well, it's very clear that every time Iran has its back to the wall on something related to negotiations, or, for instance, the recent events in the Gulf, the Mercer attack, and plus the attempt to hijack another vessel in the Gulf, you see suddenly Iran escalates it in other arenas. Like, for instance, we've seen this recent escalation of missile attacks from the southern Lebanon into Israel, out of the blue, no context. And this is the Iranian playbook all the time, that whenever they have some problems, whether it's the negotiations on the nuclear deal, whether it's issues related to their terrorist attacks, they simply try to divert the attention, to the Israel-Lebanon or Israel-Gaza arena. And then we kind of forget, Washington loses track very easily of, what the hot security issue is. So one, it's not surprising to me that we had this sudden escalation and, missile attacks in the north of Israel, out of context, out of the blue. This is definitely the Iranian playbook. And two, I think we have to see the American response to the Mercer in a larger context, that it really does seem stuck. The Biden administration had really gone full force, wanting to do a deal with Iran, almost, with no preconditions, no major changes. And despite that, still was not able to close a deal, really because Iran isn't in any ways willing to even sort of play the American game. So yes, I think it's not surprising that this is a very frustrating experience for Biden administration.
Our friend Brian Leib said the diplomacy with the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism was never going to succeed. President Biden must reverse course immediately. It's time to support the Iranian people, not the regime. Do you agree on that?
I don't think this is going to be the Biden administration's policies. I think that, human rights is a very selective policy. Often Americans use it where they feel they can and without any sort of retribution. Or in some places they actually use it more against allies than against enemies. So no, I don't see. I don't think even in fact, you could have even almost a total uprising, and it would be, still, I think that the administration is going to try to make a deal with this existing government in Iran.
Mm-hmm. U.S. urges Iran to return to nuclear talks as Raisi is sworn in. Talks over reviving the nuclear deal remain on hold, a process the Biden administration warned cannot go on indefinitely. What do you expect in this matter?
Again, I think that they can go on indefinitely. They can. First thing, there's always sometimes the sides like a process. Mm-hmm. They have some interest even in the process of the talk. So I think actually what's good about the elections and inauguration of Raisi was there was a false deadline. The U.S. sort of set it up that we have to have a deal before there's elections in Iran. And now those elections have taken place. Now Raisi has been installed. So I think actually this frees up, in a sense, the process to a longer process. On the other hand, things are happening in Iran almost unprecedented, that I think, even if the regime returned to the deal and got billions more of cash, it not necessarily can get it out of its current crisis with its own people. You have an energy powerhouse that can't deliver stable electricity to its own people. You have a rich country environmentally, or land and that can't deliver water to its people. I think these last round of demonstrations, especially in Khuzestan, in Tabriz, I think this is very worrisome to the regime, and I think even the JCPOA can't save them.
You mentioned on your Twitter account that reports comes about the Iran regime assassinated a Kurdish leader traveling in Erbil. Tehran continued to assassinate and kidnap representatives of Iran ethnic groups abroad. A reminder that kidnapped Ahwaz activist from Sweden, Habib Shab, is in Tehran custody. What can you talk about human rights in this country?
Right. So, Iran systematically executes opposition members abroad or tries to kidnap them and bring them to Iran. We saw, these really hundreds of cases over several years. But for some reasons, the members of the ethnic groups, I think also some of the opposition groups themselves, the mainstream opposition groups, ignore them. And, it's pretty amazing, this case of Habib Shab, a permanent resident of Sweden, legally living in Sweden, active, really kidnapped from Istanbul on a private trip. And there's no outrage, not from Sweden, not from, really anywhere, but really these leaders of various ethnic groups, they're not safe abroad. And it's amazing how these kidnaps, even for instance, there's been even citizens of Holland, Denmark, really gunned down by Iranian agents in Europe, and really Europe doesn't do anything to protect, their own citizens that they welcomed to their countries.
Yeah, I want to ask you about the latest interview with an American official. She said that Zarif told him all the missiles, Iranian missiles, is only to target Saudi Arabia, not to target Israel. Is this occurred, or how can you explain the war happening between Iran and KSA?
Yeah, so I mean, first thing, missiles can, they don't have a specific address on them, so I think this is kind of a strange statement. But clearly, Iran and Saudi Arabia are two powerful countries bordering each other. It's clear they're always going to have strategic competition beyond even other issues. But Saudi Arabia clearly aligned with the United States, Iran clearly against the United States. So it's, and also oil policies. I mean, look how much, even when there's some insecurity in Saudi Arabia, or if Iran manages to, knock out some facilities even for a week in Saudi Arabia, how much profit Iran gains from this with the rise in the oil prices. And I think this is it's going to be a permanent feature of Iran-Saudi relations, certainly while they're part of different alliance systems.
You probably followed up the latest meetings in OPEC Plus. How do you describe the misunderstanding happening that happened between Emirates and Saudi Arabia, and what is your vision of resolving this problem?
Right. So I think actually on the OPEC politics, something even bigger happened today, which was the Biden administration, the White House, releasing a statement calling on OPEC to produce more oil. It's a very strange statement because on one hand, the Biden administration has taken a number of steps to limit U.S. oil and natural gas production, freezing all drilling licenses on federal lands. Basically saying that even though it's not legally binding, but that all cars should be, by 2030, should 50% of all vehicles sold should be electric vehicles and not based on gasoline. A variety of other steps that have basically frozen the U.S. oil and gas industry. So why would they want OPEC to produce more oil? While at the same time the U.S. producing less oil? I mean, you have a solution at home, which is actually giving also closing different pipeline projects that also make it less commercially viable for U.S. oil production. So we're seeing this also in natural gas. A lot of the natural gas produced in the U.S. is what's called associated gas. When you produce oil, this gas comes out anyway. So U.S. gas production is going to go down as well, and this is going to we're already seeing, huge natural gas prices, almost unprecedented in Europe, high in Asia. So we're going to see oil prices up, plus natural gas prices are up all around the world. The U.S. has a solution at home. Instead, it calls on OPEC, to up its production.
Mhm. A good point. Let me talk about Azerbaijan. You are an expert. The total volume of non-oil trade between UAE and Azerbaijan during the first 9 months of 2020 amounted to more than 1.2 billion. The UAE is Azerbaijan's largest trading partner in the Gulf Cooperating Council, as it accounts for 76% of Azerbaijan trade with the GCC countries. What can you say about this collaboration?
Yeah, I think, anything you learn about especially the Caucasus region where Azerbaijan is located, but also the Middle East as well, that alliances are very dynamic and also not based on culture, not strict alliances. So let's say Azerbaijan's closest alliance is with Turkey. Turkey and UAE, obviously very problematic relations, but Azerbaijan and UAE can enjoy very, very good relations, regardless of the conflicts between UAE and Turkey. And I think even if effectively Azerbaijan is tried in the last couple of years to actually be a bridge between Israel and Turkey, I think probably Azerbaijan could have a constructive role between Turkey and UAE as well, and hopefully those relations will become will be good for the region if UAE and Turkey have more cooperative relations. So yeah, I think it's Azerbaijan's way is that that it has multi-directional alliances, and if you look, for instance, on the border of Iran to its north, there are two countries, Armenia and Azerbaijan. Armenia is mostly a Christian country. Azerbaijan is mostly Shia Muslims. Armenia invaded Azerbaijan, created 1 million Shia refugees. Who does Iran support in this conflict? Armenia. I mean, meaning there's no role to religion, to culture. It's strict realpolitik. Iran, in my opinion, why do they support Armenia in this conflict? Is because a third of the population of Iran is ethnic Azerbaijani. They're very afraid that the ethnic Azerbaijanis in Iran are getting more nationalistic, and so therefore they support Armenia to try to keep Azerbaijan down and deterred. But I think this policy is backfiring on Iran, because if you've seen in recent months, really the demonstrations against the regime and its policies are increasing among the Azerbaijani minority in Iran.
How can you evaluate the Abraham Accords economically?
So, there's obviously been a lot of essential trade between Israel and the Gulf states and Morocco as well. It's part of the Abraham Accords process through third parties. I think probably Jordan made a lot of money, and businesses in Turkey as well by somewhat serving as intermediaries between Israel and countries that in the past it didn't have formal relations with, but in a sense it was still trading and trading technology. So some of it, there was a lot of trade that was going on that wasn't as apparent, directly. So while these volumes are important and the fact that they can be open trade and not need these intermediaries, it makes it cheaper and more attractive. It's still a reconciliation or a consolidation of a process that even continued before the peace accords.
Mm-hmm. My last question about what the New York Times mentioned on the battle lines. They said the battle lines are forming in Biden's climate push. The president is moving rapidly to address global warming with unlikely allies backing him and huge hurdles, some from his own party directly ahead. What is your point of view on this?
Right. I think, it's really important, especially in the Middle East, which is so dependent on oil and gas production and revenues. We use all these phrases interchangeably: renewable, electricity, green, clean. They're so different. And I don't think the American public even notices, for instance, most of what's clean energy? What's the definition? It's low carbon. No, low carbon is not necessarily green. There are a lot of things like hydropower, many wind projects, even solar projects that actually have high environmental impact, high environmental damage. So we've changed all the discussion. No one cares about green energy anymore, and it's really too bad. Or they think electricity is automatically something that's green and clean, which it isn't. We know you can produce electricity from oil, for instance. You can produce electricity from coal. It might look clean to the person who's plugging something in, but the power plant is only a couple kilometers away, and could be using, highly polluting fuel. So I think we have such a mix-up here. And with people thinking, oh, if suddenly they drive an electric vehicle, they're doing something wonderful for the environment. I mean, it'll take years. I mean, just the shipping the batteries and the materials that have been mined with electricity, mostly based on coal in China, in India, in Indonesia, and other places where most electricity is on coal, shipping those materials to the West. And then this doesn't make electricity necessarily clean nor green. I think it's much more complicated, and unfortunately, I think most of the publics don't see the difference between renewable, green, clean, and electricity as well.
What are the climate change challenges that the Biden administration is facing now?
So I think certainly there's within the Democratic Party and sort of on a wide public level and non-governmental organizations, there's big support for climate aversion policies. But on the other hand, there's been a lot of other issues attached on to this agenda, whether it's anti-meat or subsidies for social services and issues that are not directly connected to climate, so much making them more expensive and politically more complicated. So I think what basically the administration has been doing, and not consciously, but they've been making, in order to satisfy the public demands of the US, and we see the same thing in Europe, they've actually been making it much more difficult for US and European oil companies, oil and gas companies to operate. But demand in the world isn't going anywhere. I mean, look at the global oil price, look at the price of gas in different markets, as we've discussed. So basically, this is a huge boost for oil and gas companies in the Middle East, in Asia, in Russia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, because their publics will allow them still to produce oil and gas. Oil and gas is certainly necessary for the next 15 to 20 years, and in probably in current, at least in current volumes. You're going to smash the ability, the governments are smashing the ability for companies to work in the US and Europe, but that demand isn't going anywhere. So actually, it's going to be a huge opportunity for companies in the Middle East and beyond to keep producing oil and gas. Mm-hmm. 15, 20 years down the line, they might have to be thinking about, something new. But in the interim, it's actually a windfall for oil and gas companies outside of the US and Europe.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
And of course, with big geopolitical implications. I mean, the fact that the US became a major natural gas exporter and a net oil exporter changed the geopolitics of energy around the world. And this is all going back, to the pre-position.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being with us, Professor Brenda Shaffer. Thank you.